the Russian army has been given a peacekeeping mission, so-called, in East Ukraine. What to expect now? During the last 48 hours, many videos have appeared showing these troops. Now, if we stop this and look, you'll see that all the vehicles have a large Z applied in white paint. That's a recognition symbol for soldiers who may soon enter combat against an enemy equipped with similar vehicles. How far will they go? The Russian army has moved a big proportion of its combat power, 70% according to some estimates, to the area around Ukraine, about 125 battalion tactical groups, up to 1,000 soldiers in each of those, plus supporting elements, taking them to around 175,000 soldiers. They're commanded by half a dozen higher headquarters in Crimea, bordering the separatist-held Donbass there, and just north, where a key concentration from the 1st Tank Army is centred, including those tanks we saw at the start, to Belarus. Russia now has many military options. It could send troops into breakaway Donetsk and Luhansk, as tonight's announcements suggest, or go further to batter the Ukrainian army. It could push beyond, and current dispositions suggest a double envelopment. Those two arms you see there from Crimea and the Belgorod area might be used to cut off much of eastern Ukraine. At the highest end of escalation would be the type of plan revealed by the UK Ministry of Defence last Friday, suggesting a drive to Kiev and indeed taking the whole of eastern Ukraine. Now, experts in Kiev doubt this. They feel that Russia's forces may be big, but there just aren't enough to occupy such a huge area or surround their capital, a city of 5 million. As for the trigger for this military action, President Putin hosted a public meeting of his Security Council today. There, he sounded the death knell for the Minsk Accords, the long-stalled peace process between Ukraine and the Russian separatists. And he delivered this a few hours later in a TV address.
Видим, что правящая в Киеве верхушка постоянно и публично заявляет о нежелании выполнять Минский комплекс мер по урегулированию конфликта. Не заинтересована в мирном решении. Напротив, пытается вновь организовать на Донбассе блицкриг, как это уже было в 2014 и 2015 годах. Чем закончились тогда эти авантюры, мы помним.
Well, what about the trigger for military intervention? There have been incidents in the Russian separatist areas that seem to be the very provocations that Western leaders warned about, from the alleged shelling of a border post in Russia. Ukraine says none of its artillery was within range, to this apparently graphic footage which claimed to show a man who'd lost his leg in Ukrainian shelling, but who some observers have pointed out appears to already have a fixing for a prosthesis. Extraordinary goings-on then as Russia tries to shape public opinion for action. So how will President Putin's speech be regarded by its audience in Russia? Earlier I spoke to Andrei Kortunov, Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council. Over a fragile internet connection, our apologies for that, I asked him whether tonight's speech was effectively a declaration of war.
Well, I wouldn't be that confident about that. And it's now up to the West to decide whether business as usual is still an option after this diplomatic recognition of the two breakaway republics in East Ukraine.
What would you say, listening to that speech, is his state of mind?
Well, first of all, I think that it is very personal. You know, he has some very strong personal feelings towards Ukraine. Clearly, it is a disappointment. There is a lot of resentment there. And I think that he tries very hard to justify the decision that he has just made. It's not easy, but he tries to be as convincing as he possibly can. This speech was addressed primarily to the domestic audience. And of course, many people in Russia feel sympathetic to those who live in the Donetsk and Lugansk areas of Ukraine. The general perception is that life is really hard for these people. They have to exist in the situation of permanent instability. So I think that if the decision made by Putin can bring more order and more peace to the region, this is something that the Russian public would definitely support. Though, of course, the Russian public is also concerned about the repercussions of this decision, namely about more Western sanctions, and the people are thinking about how these sanctions might affect their day-to-day lives.
Andrei, you said before that the measure was intended to bring peace to those areas of East Ukraine, but it did seem that President Putin, by talking, for example, of a Ukrainian desire to get nuclear weapons sooner or later, and that they were holding a knife to the throat of Russia, was using a language that could justify going all the way to Kiev. I mean, to change the government there.
Well, I can only hope that it will not happen, because it is relatively easy to put the Donetsk and Lugansk areas under control. The population there is predominantly pro-Russian. The leadership, of course, expects Russia to get involved. But if you move to Ukraine proper, if you move in the direction of Kiev or Kharkiv or West Ukraine, definitely you're likely to meet a lot of resistance. You cannot occupy all the country. Russia is not in a position to do that. Ukraine is relatively big by European standards. It's more than 40 million people. How can you possibly control such a country if it is not ready to accept your rule? So I frankly doubt very much that a large-scale military operation of Russia in Ukraine makes any sense. You can, in theory, you can think of a surgical strike, but no government imposed by Moscow would be regarded as legitimate in Ukraine. So I think that it would also boost anti-Russian feelings among the core Ukrainian population. And I hope that everybody in the Kremlin understands this reality quite clearly.
Andrei Kortunov, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So what now from both the West and Ukraine? Well, joining us in the studio are Congressman Adam Smith, Chairman of the US House of Representatives Armed Services Committee. Welcome. And Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, Vadim Prystaiko, who's just been on a teleconference with President Zelensky and Boris Johnson. I know you can't give us an exact readout of what was said, but what is President Zelensky's mood after this speech from Vladimir Putin tonight?
We just had a National Security and Defense Council. It's still ongoing. We just had a break and had the chance to talk to President Biden, both, and Prime Minister Johnson. I believe that as of now, what we are saying, what we are seeing, that's blatant violation of international rules, not just our integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. And what we also see that this is a clear danger to our state, and the incursion is already started. What I believe President asked both.
You think the Russian troops have already entered?
Yes, because what they signed today, that's already they will provide the armed forces of Russia will provide security to this.
But you don't know that they've entered. Sorry, just to be specific
they are
about
not
that point.
entering as we speak.
Right.
But what Putin told his military forces to engage in providing and maintaining security of newly recognized, an hour ago recognized new republics, as he sees that.
Congressman Smith, I mean, we've seen in recent weeks President Biden's administration talking about sanctions, revealing certain aspects of the plan, the provocations, all these sort of things. Would you accept that whatever they were trying to deter hasn't really worked?
Well, to date, no, it has not. Putin's troops are still on the border. I mean, also, I will say to date, he has not actually invaded Ukraine, and we have to use the levers we have available. Big lever is showing that this is going to strengthen NATO, not weaken it, that these actions are going to get the opposite result of what Putin is looking for, and also to be unified on sanctions that are going to be imposed. And this decision to take away the structural integrity of a sovereign nation, that is a violation. Sanctions will now be imposed. The president has said as much. So we need
on
to
those
act.
Two breakaway
Yes, just for doing that. I mean, that is the incursion that we said. It's clear. It is a clear violation of international law, and we should have no ambiguity about that. And we should hold them accountable for that decision, even as we also try to prevent, further unwarranted aggression.
Well, in terms of a possible further aggression, I have to say, hearing some of that language in the speech, if I was Ukrainian, I'd be worried. I mean, do you worry that this might be about going all the way to Kiev or or taking large parts of your country?
I was also listening to what he was saying, almost an hour of these historic debates with himself. And I have to tell you, when the nuclear nation is calling your nation a historical mistake which has to be fixed, yes, you have to be worried what he has in mind.
Let's talk about sanctions in a little bit more depth. As you say, President Biden has announced an initial raft and is obviously going to be reviewing this by the hour, depending presumably on where Russian forces go. But this isn't the sort of big bazooka, is it, of cutting off foreign finance, for example, to the Russian economy, some of the things that have been talked about?
Yeah, that has not been decided yet. The president made a statement, announcement, and the clear thing is, anybody doing business with the two so-called breakaway republics will be cut off. So that's the focus of this. And also we're leaving options on the table to do more sanctions beyond that. But the big bazooka you refer to is basically to cut off Russian oligarchs and Russian business people from using the international financial system. And between the U.S. and Great Britain, we have the power to do that, and we are prepared to do that.
And if the Russian forces do enter, we don't absolutely know that they've gone into those self-declared republics, but if they do go in, do you think the US will continue to supply the kind of advanced weapons, the Javelin anti-tank missiles, the Stinger anti-aircraft missiles that they've done in recent weeks? Will they feed Ukrainian resistance to such a move?
Yes, absolutely. And we have to have a robust discussion, not just in the US. Remember, this is our allies. Obviously, this is working with the Ukrainian government. What weaponry they need, how quickly can we get it to them? Yes, we need to provide more weapons to help Ukraine defend itself.
And in those terms, I mean, we know the UK Prime Minister is going to chair a meeting of the Emergency Committee tomorrow. What would be on your list as Ukrainians in terms of what the UK could do? Already done a fair bit, but to help more.
Yes, you did, and the United States did. We have covered more or less the immediate threat of the tank incursion. We have now enough rockets to cover all the tanks which can cross our border. We have some troubles with sea and air. That's where our efforts are concentrating right now.
Do you think, when you hear some of the language that President Putin was using, I mean, obviously a deep-held set of grievances there, quite an emotional language, holding a knife to the throat of Russia. Does his state of mind cause you concern?
Yes, absolutely. There's been a lot written about it. He's been very isolated for the last 2 years. And the parade of having all these people come up and now let us hear what you think, which is basically, now please tell people what I told you to think. He does not seem to be getting any sort of advice other than what he wants to hear. And yes, it is very concerning that he has isolated himself in that way. The cost of doing this to Russia is going to be enormous. Just about every commentator, in fact, I heard, we met with the Prime Minister Johnson earlier today with the Speaker of the House, and we were even talking about, why would Putin do this given the obvious downside for Russia? And I think you hit upon the answer. He's not getting good advice. He has isolated himself.
One of the things that President Biden, in common with President Obama and President Bush, have tried to do is refocus on Asia. To what extent does this drag the US back into Europe in a major way and, in a sense, guarantee something President Putin would like to be rid of, a continued substantial military presence in Europe?
Well, I think there's always been a bit of a misunderstanding about the whole pivot to Asia. The point was that when then President Obama was the first one to sort of announce that, we hadn't been paying enough attention to Asia. But I can tell you, as the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, I've joked that we ought to have a mnemonic for China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, transnational terrorist threats. Okay? And you can rank them however you want to rank them. They're all on the list. They are all national security concerns. And Russia has never not been a national security concern in the last 10 years. So they're very much on the list, and we are not moving away from that. You saw that at the Munich Security Conference. The unity of the NATO partners and of the U.S. focused certainly on Ukraine, but also on the broader threat that Putin presents. He is a major factor in our national security plans.
I mean, the US was going down under President Obama to 0 tanks in Europe. So to an extent, in the years since then, it has reinforced its presence. Would you envisage further heavy forces being forward deployed in Poland, the Baltic republics, wherever?
Absolutely. As you know, I mean, President Putin's comments in 2007, which were the first indication that all of our... Look, we tried to work with Russia not to subjugate them, but to integrate them into the world. Okay, we provided a lot of support. Putin chose a different path. And as he's continued down that path, we, our NATO partners, everyone has recognized with a growing threat requires a growing response.
Vadim Prystaiko, can I ask you, you are also a former foreign minister of Ukraine, so I'm sure that diplomacy is in your DNA, as it were, but do you think everything that President Macron, Chancellor Scholz have been trying to do over recent weeks has been well judged? Some people say they've been played, that they've tried to put the Ukrainian government under a lot of pressure.
We have full respect to what both nations are doing, and not just now. They've been doing it all the almost 8 years, trying to resolve this issue, trying to, invest so much political capital of their own, a previous president, previous chancellor, so they did a fair share of what could be done. The result is what we see right now. What we try
So it was
all this time,
futile?
at the end of the day, yes. They're still doing what they just killed Minsk agreement, which both nations brokered for us and with us. Now it's dead. All this normative format, all the meetings of the leaders in the Paris last one is dead. It's not for nothing.
OK, so for viewers unfamiliar, this was a process started in 2014. The Germans and the French were co-guarantors of it. I mean, where do you see peacemaking go? I mean, clearly there's going to be some very difficult weeks ahead, but in the end, there's presumably going to have to be some sort of forum for reconciling people in eastern Ukraine with the rest of the country, or not, do you think? Is that moment over?
No, I don't think that moment is over. I think it's very difficult. And the language that has been used is, if we're really going to get Putin to stop, what's the off-ramp? What is the credible way that we can uphold the integrity? Telling other nations what they can and cannot do is a non-starter. We can't accede to his notion of going back to the mid-90s. But is there an off-ramp? And that's what we are all we're trying to find that off-ramp that is acceptable. But we still have a lot of work, and diplomacy still must be used.
And how does President Zelensky now frame this to Ukrainian people? What does he say? Does he order national mobilization? Does he keep going with his keep calm and don't panic message? I mean, what does he do in this situation?
He will go in a minute to national television. I understand as soon as National Security Council is over this sitting, he will go and talk to nations. What we already have done, we try to reach out to those people in these separate republics, telling them, please come back home. Is it still time before Russian troops will be on this part in this area? Please come. We'll try to live and try to find a way, as the congressman just said.
And Congressman, in terms of the big picture, I mean, where this leaves us, the kind of message that what we think is now underway might give to the American public. I mean, what do you think of the fact that the person in charge of an arsenal of 6,000 nuclear weapons is, as you yourself said, isolated, cut off from good advice? I mean, how much should that worry the American public?
Well, it should worry the American public a lot. And, I'm chairman of the Armed Services Committee, but I also represent 740,000 constituents. And you will typically hear people say, they're focused on kitchen table issues, on getting out of COVID, on, dealing with crime, on getting the economy going. I also have a very large Ukrainian population in my district as well. So they're very focused on this. But I think America is very focused on it because of that threat. We can't walk away from it, because not only is Russia a threat, the idea that you can do this opens it up to other autocrats, to Iran, to China. This is something that's important to the entire world, not just Ukraine.